It says we're live. Hello, hello. It's Tuesday, 4 o'clock Pacific, 7 o'clock Eastern, 6 o'clock here in Costa Rica and Central Time, midnight in Dublin, 1 a.m. in Milan and most of Europe, 8:30 and 9:30 Wednesday morning in Australia, and it's Facebook Live, and he's bored. That's he doesn't
Didn't take
care about
long.
the times. So Gio wanted to say hello before his bedtime, and I think that may be all we're going to get of him. It's Facebook Live. Hello, everyone. And our very special guest today is my friend, Dr. Marcelle Pick. Oh, thank you. Thank you. And Marcelle, it's nice to see you again. Thanks for being here.
You too. It's wonderful to be here.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. He's trying to make sure I've got all the supplies I need.
Exactly.
For today's event. We're talking today about the event that began yesterday, actually. But before we do that, let's give him one more shot here.
Oh, absolutely. You are such a cutie pie. Hi.
He is. He's the happiest little boy, and
I bet.
it gives us so much joy every day with him. Yes. Okay. Okay. Night night. Say night night, everybody. Night night. Okay.
You want the AC on?
Yes, please. Thank you. Thank you. And Marcelle, I usually give a shout out to a few people that
Absolutely.
are here, so bear with me for a minute. We've got Gwen's here from New Zealand. Hi, Gwen. And do I have it right? Is it 11:30 on Wednesday in New Zealand? Lucia's here, says, oh, how cute. Oh, thank you, Lucia, from Arizona. Marilla's here from Hollywood, Florida. Charlene's here, and a CGP, a newish CGP in Fort Lauderdale. Hi, thanks for being here. Kat's here from Kentucky. Jill's here from Anchorage. And the list goes on, and we'll say hello to more people as we go along. So the event that began yesterday is an event that I consider a really important event, and that is the Adrenal Solutions Summit that Dr. Pick is putting on. And I just want to say, when we opened our practice in 1980, and my God, that dates me, doesn't it?
I'm not much behind you.
But there were two things that in the world of holistic healthcare were critically important to rule out for most people that came in who were sick. One of them was blood sugar problems, and there was a lot of emphasis at the time on what's called hypoglycemia or low blood sugar. And now we know so much more that that's a component of now what we refer to as insulin resistance and a loss of insulin sensitivity. But back then, we didn't really know that, you know. And the other, besides hypoglycemia, was hypoadrenia, the adrenal glands not working very well. And already back then, 40 years ago, we knew there was a lot of science that said, you really don't get a degenerative disease until your adrenal glands can't handle the stress of life anymore. And that's really not changed. So what that means in my book, and why I was so excited to capture Dr. Pick for Facebook Live tonight, is that we all need to know about our adrenal function, the glands that handle the stress of life. Because if we're trying everything, but we haven't quite dialed down making sure that our adrenal glands are robustly healthy, the result is that we have this emergency brake. You know, when you back out of a driveway and you say, what's wrong with this car? It's not moving very, oh, emergency brake. And you let it go. That if we're not taking into account our adrenal glands and their function, we're missing a very important tool in our well-being and our striving for robust health. So I'm really glad that we're doing this today. And with that, I'm going to ask Dr. Pick, what is the juice that people can get from this summit?
You know, I started out wanting to give people information, and what I've done in the summit is each of the speakers is robust in their understanding and knowledge about thyroid, about paleo, about keto, about hormones. And at the end of each of the talks, what I did was I summed it up. So you can really have a kind of a ballpark information center at the end of each of the talks, the points that I thought were really helpful. And, you know, we are all stressed out. It is a really unusual time in the history of humanity. And people are, especially I see it for women, but I see it in men too, are having to multitask so much. They've got their kids that are homeschooled and they're in school, out of school, COVID, no COVID. Their jobs are at home, they're at the office. They may have lost their jobs. We're trying to figure out food issues. We have, you know, shortage of paper towels, and it's a lot to accommodate. You can't see friends, you can't see family, you can't get together, you're being careful. And we already had stress before. So we're now bombarded, and our poor adrenals can only tolerate so much stress, and the body can't live without stress. We need it, but we don't need overabundance of stress. So what I decided to do with the summit is to present it in such a way that people can glimpse information that might be helpful for them, to give them opportunity to do things that will make a difference to decrease the burden on the body of the stress.
Oh, that's marvelous. And what I've not heard that anyone else has done is summarize each talk.
They haven't.
So, because realistically, how many speakers are in this event?
58.
58. Who has 58 hours to listen to, it's not possible. But I would assume your summaries are like 5 minutes or 10 minutes.
Right, 5 minutes.
Just the bullet points. And that's something that everyone can digest.
Yeah.
Everyone
absolutely.
can, over the course of a week or 2 weeks, listen to a 5-minute summary of what that person said. Oh, all right, that makes sense. And the next one, oh, all right, that makes sense. And then the next one, oh, I think I want to listen to that one. And then you go listen to it, right? So you're getting the Cliff Notes. I loved Cliff Notes back in high school.
I know. I couldn't live without them.
That's right. That's right. It made a difference.
No question.
You're getting the Cliff Notes of every interview from these world experts, or who Dr. Pick wouldn't interview unless they were experts in their field of keto or thyroid function or whatever it is that the topic that they're talking about. But you get the Cliff Note version, which would give you the opportunity to watch it or not watch it.
Right, absolutely. And I re-interviewed Jeff Bland, our favorite, and he did an amazing talk about how fear in our culture right now is compromising the adrenals. And I was floored. He was so eloquent in this discussion. It was over more than an hour. But you know how Jeff is, and he kind of simplified it and he explained it in ways that people can understand. It was a fabulous talk. So I changed what he did last year and I put this new one in this year. It was really amazing.
Marvelous, marvelous. Well, I certainly want to listen to that one. I absolutely do, the full thing.
Yeah, he did an amazing job.
The first time I heard Jeff Bland speak, I was just mesmerized, and I knew that I had found my new mentor.
Oh, hands down.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
So let's just go back to some basics for people in case those that don't know. What are the adrenal glands? What's their job?
Sure. So what's so interesting in our medical society is that we never talk about adrenals. We talk about if people have very severe problems like Addison's, which we don't see that often, which is low cortisol levels, or very high cortisol levels with Cushing's. And that's what many of the practitioners, physicians test for, but we don't see it very often. But what we now understand scientifically is that the adrenals are crucially important for our health. They are the things that actually help regulate blood sugars. Who knew? They help with fluid retention. The adrenals have huge impact if they're overburdened with respect to hormonal control, with respect to thyroid. If we have an adrenal that's overworked and we have high amounts of cortisol, it actually blocks the ability of the thyroid to work properly. So we're looking at high reverse T3s because we've had too much stress for too long. It affects the immune system. And I can oftentimes, when I see somebody in my practice that has an autoimmune disorder, if you go back and you track it, you can see almost the time it started, and it almost always corresponds to enormous amounts of stress. So we think in our culture that stress is not a big deal. You know, we just kind of forget it, or it just happened yesterday, just get over it. It doesn't work that way because the body continues to sometimes feel like it's in fight flight. So if you don't have adrenals that are functioning properly, you have enormous problems physiologically. And now, years ago, I was always interested to look at, does our history, does our story from growing up affect our adrenals? And I've been in the kind of online since 2001 going, yes, it really does affect our adrenals. The stress really does.
You know, I'm going to pause you right there. That I went on your website today and I looked for anything you might have on the adrenals. And there are so many articles you've written that people can click on and read the article and click on and read this article. There were so many of them that you have been doing this for 15, 20 years, published since
2001. Yeah, I have over 2,000 articles there, and I've been writing 2 articles a week since that time.
Oh my.
And, you know, the thing that's so interesting is that we really seldom talk about adrenals, and many endocrinologists just laugh and just say there's no such thing as adrenal fatigue. Okay, I'll give them that. The name is ridiculous. You know, fatigue, what organs really get fatigued? But adrenal dysfunction is hugely problematic in our culture.
Yes.
And
yes.
we don't, you know, we don't have energy when our adrenals are not working properly. We can't sleep well at night. We feel anxious. Anxiety is a huge thing we see with people with adrenal dysfunction. Foggy thinking, they can't think clearly. They're not motivated anymore, especially when the adrenals are very low level and they're not working and producing cortisol the way they should. So our body really responds, and there's a hormone DHEA that's really important in terms of supporting DHEA, the adrenals. And when you don't have enough, your get up and go is get up and gone. And that's exactly what I see in my practices. I don't know, I just don't feel like it. No, I don't want to go to the movies. I'm just too tired. And that oftentimes comes as a result of years of chronic stress.
And so when people are in that situation of their get up and go is got up and gone, they find some stimulant to keep them going, like excess coffee. Not that coffee's bad, but excess coffee or excess
sugar
or excess exercise, or any excess that just kind of jumps you up. And we call it, I remember the visual. My first mentor was Dr. George Goodhart, the founder of muscle testing, applied kinesiology. And he talk about hypoadrenia or low functioning adrenal glands and say, people's lives, they're actually whipping the dying horse, you know, to get away from the robbers that are chasing the stagecoach. And, you know, and then I turn on a Western movie and there's the stagecoach and the guy riding shotgun is turning around and firing at the robbers, and the guy that's got the reins going, yeah, yeah. And I just imagine that that's what we're doing in our lives unknowingly, but that's what we're doing just to keep us going.
Absolutely. You know, and that woman that says, you know, I can just do it one more time. It's like taking, you know, doing a huge hike with a stress fracture, just saying, I'm just going to make myself do it. It really causes health problems on the other side. It's not a good idea.
Yeah. So we some questions have already come in. Shaquila,
Sure.
who always asks great questions, says, hi, loving the summit, because it started yesterday, everyone. So we're giving you the link to register here so you can jump on right away. Loving the summit, and wanted to ask how adrenals that are worn out affect thyroid and can either cause dizziness or balance issues at times.
Yes. So what's interesting is that when you have adrenal dysfunction, it doesn't affect everyone in the same way. But if somebody has significant stress, the cortisol, you might notice that the TSH is normal, TSH gets converted to T4 and T4 gets converted to T3, which is the active form of thyroid. Too much cortisol blocks the thyroid and increases reverse T3. So it's almost as though you don't have any thyroid function at all. And what you can have also with that is dizziness. and also balance issues contributing to that. The thing that we oftentimes see also is low blood pressure. So when you're sitting down and you get up too quickly, the blood pressure is so low, you feel lightheaded and you have to sit down. And those are hallmark signs of adrenal dysfunction. So it really behooves someone, if they have these symptoms, to actually get their adrenal tested. And I don't mean with a blood test. A blood test gives me a standard one level, and adrenals are really diurnal. So they're high in the morning and low at night. So you want to see that curve going on. And we can't do that with one blood test. The one blood test will tell us, are we really seriously sick with Cushing's or Addison's? But I never see that. But I do see very significant problems when I look at the adrenals, looking at 7 or 8 in the morning. First when you get up, then half an hour later, then around noon, 4 in the afternoon, and around 10 at night. Then I can determine what's going on with the thyroid, because I'm going to treat them differently depending on what the results are.
You know, I never thought about this before as you were answering the question, and because I'm still picturing the stagecoach driver whipping the dying horse. And when we have high levels of stress hormones, because we're responding to some stress in our lives and we're trying to make sure that we're going to survive, is the increase in reverse T3, which lowers our energy levels at the cellular level, is that a way of trying to put the brakes on a little bit?
Hands down.
Yeah.
Hands down.
So it's a safety mechanism.
Yeah. And the body will do anything it can to protect itself, including the women that come into my office saying, I'm doing everything right. I'm eating perfectly. I'm exercising like crazy. I feel really tired after I exercise, but I'm doing it and I'm still not losing weight. And the reality is the body will conserve every calorie because it thinks it's its last. It's a very ancient form of protection. So it's not unusual for someone to not be able to lose weight when they have huge amounts of, adrenal issues, specifically low cortisol production.
Yeah. Let's see. Charlene is here. Oh, Charlene's the newest CGP in Fort Lauderdale. Kat's in Kentucky. Jill says, hello, Dr. Tom and Dr. Marcelle from Anchorage. Great. Quincy's here from Iowa. Gwen Jones says, it's 1 o'clock in the afternoon in New Zealand on daylight saving times. Thanks, Gwen. Good to know. Thank you. Claudine's in British Columbia. Leslie says our circadian rhythm is also off globally, which puts our immune system into a tailspin. That's a good point. Jillian says hello from Cleveland. Gwen says 58. Wow. What's 58? I missed that. Whatever it was, I missed it, Gwen. Tell me what you mean about 58. Kat asked the question, wondering what the best type supplement is for adrenals. I have no thyroid, and should we be on it all the time?
So the answer to that is a little bit complicated. So I will put people on a different supplement depending upon what I see for test results. For example, if somebody has high cortisol levels, I want to put them on something called phosphatidylserine to bring that number down. I'm going to change their diet, going to urge them to get off caffeine and to get a good amount of sleep. And I may put them on phosphatidylserine at night. So if they're high and low throughout the day, I'm going to vary the supplements. I might use astragalus, cordyceps, rhodiola. I have kind of my favorites. I think a lot of us do. They're adaptogenic herbs. But if I have someone that has low cortisol, I'm going to be using something with licorice in it. And I'll either do deglycerized licorice or regular licorice to get that, blood, to get the glucose or the cortisol level up. So it depends on what those numbers look like in terms of what I actually use. So I'm going to adapt my recommendations according to what the adrenals tell me.
Great, great. Jill asked, does gluten affect the adrenals? My doctor keeps dismissing me when I ask that question. Is there a good peer-reviewed study to show him?
It's a great question. What we see oftentimes is that adrenals are affected by many things. If you are someone that actually has a gluten reaction, which, as you know, more than I know, that it can be a significant health problem for people. And one of the ways the body adapts is to protect itself. And if you have any kind of chronic disease, you're going to have reactions in the adrenals. So yes, it can be. And it is one of the first things I have people get off of. And I do a test through a company called Diagnostics, and that actually will give me a gliadin level. So I can get at least an overall quick perspective about whether gluten is a contributing factor to their adrenal dysfunction. In terms of a peer-reviewed article, I don't know one off the top of my head, perhaps you do, that would be used to be able to tell them. But the problem is that one article oftentimes is not enough. They need multiple articles and multiple studies before they're convinced that adrenals are even an issue, much less affected by gluten.
Yeah, in Italy, there are 36 centers that are designated by the government as gluten-related disorder centers. And that's important because if you get a diagnosis from them that you have a problem with wheat, your food's a tax deduction. So
Wow.
the family doctors, the pediatricians, the obstetricians, gynecologists, neurologists, if they suspect a wheat-related problem, they send them to one of these centers. They're all over the country.
Amazing.
And they published a paper on 15,000 patients that had been sent to one of these centers thinking they may have a problem with wheat. Let's get that confirmed. And the number one symptom, 64 or 65%, I'm not sure, one of the two, the number one symptom of people complaining of some health condition who were positive for a wheat-related disorder, the number one symptom is fatigue.
Mm-hmm.
And
Absolutely.
that's
Absolutely.
classic as an adrenal-related symptom, just classic.
Maybe we need to send that study to this doctor.
That's right. Shanquila asks, is POTS an adrenal issue?
Well, there's a yes and no answer to that. I mean, many times when you see POTS, you are going to be, the first thing I'm going to be looking at is adrenal dysfunction. Is it always caused by that? No, but it is one of the first things on my agenda that I'm going to be looking at, no question about it. And, you know, the part that I want to reiterate is that we are all unique and we're all different. We don't need the same exact type of diet. We don't have the same kinds of responses when it comes to stress physiologically, but we all have our own reactions to too much stress and foods that are not good for us and too much sugar. And the thing that happens for many people is that they're in fight, flight, and freeze. And if you're in fight, flight, freeze all of the time, the vagus nerve becomes problematic and your body almost can't even get out of that response. It's just an automatic startle response. And that has huge physiological implications, including if we look at studies now on people that have had cancer in their history, if they're staying in that fight, flight, freeze response, their chances of metastasis are much greater. So it really behooves all of us to be paying attention to, if I'm in that state, what do I need to do myself? Because everybody's going to be different. You know, I have different reactions, I'm sure, than you do in terms of how I deal with stress. So we need to find that place in which we can have that inner peace or inner quiet.
And what is POTS? How do you describe POTS for people?
So it's almost in my mind, I think of it as a sympathetic overdrive. And the response is going to be a physiological hyper reaction to many, situations, including foods. And also these people oftentimes feel very lightheaded and dizzy and really don't have a sense of kind of balance in their lives. They just don't feel well a lot of the times. And the unfortunate part is it's not really well recognized in the medical community. It's kind of seen as this, oh my God, are you one of those people that really thinks that that's an entity? Just like, if somebody's autistic for years, we said there was no such thing. It's like, you've got to be kidding me.
Right. Gwen asked the question, I keep waking with a racing heart. I presume that it's stress related. My blood pressure is normal.
So Gwen, that's a really good question. And that is that when I hear people have, racing hearts, Oftentimes what's that related to is to high cortisol levels. And it's that startle response. You're waking up. More than likely, you didn't sleep very well because the cortisol level may have been up at night. And then the body's getting cortisol to kind of help you wake up. So that is almost always related, not so much, I wouldn't say to stress, but it's the body's response to stress. And we also have to start to understand, if I'm stressed, why? And a lot of people will say, I don't have anything to be stressed about. My life is good. Then I start to ask the questions, well, what's that inner conversation? Are you hard on yourself? Do you expect a lot from yourself? Are you, looking in the mirror, making comments? I mean, all of those things are problematic. And also, if you have a childhood in which, say, for an example, you had a parent that was pretty condescending or maybe angry, so that you hear somebody's voice that sounds like that, you're going to be in that startle response as well.
I have to give credit again to Dr. Goodhart, who explained POTS. I want to go back to POTS for a minute. It's postural orthostatic tachycardia symptoms,
Right.
Which means you start to stand up and you get lightheaded. And it gets better when you sit down. Mm-hmm. And he explained where that comes from, that, gravity is always pulling blood down. And when you stand up from lying down or from a seated position, when you stand up, gravity is pulling blood down. But your brain has to have a constant supply of blood. It can't be pulled down as you're standing up. So the brain recognizes that, wait a minute, blood's going down, but I need blood now. So it sends a message down the vagus nerve, down the spine to the adrenal glands and says, adrenal glands, I need blood and I need it right now. And the adrenal glands have a little adrenaline in storage. So they just have to secrete that adrenaline out. It's like stepping on a garden hose where you get a squirt of water going out the end when you step on a garden hose because the pressure goes up a little bit. So when the adrenaline goes out into the bloodstream, it makes the blood vessels constrict, so it pushes the blood up to the head. And so the adrenal gland or the brain is sending the message down to the adrenals, I need blood and I need it now. They secrete a little stored adrenaline. It goes into the blood vessel constricts, and blood pressure increases a little bit to push the blood up. Now, how quickly does that happen? It's done that quick. Or else if I stand up and it doesn't happen, I get a little dizzy, a little woozy. That's why you get lightheaded. It's because blood's not going up to the adrenal glands. And it's a safety mechanism that our bodies have to make sure. So it's a great test. We started doing this back in 1980. You take a person's blood pressure seated, right, and then you take it standing, have them stand up and take their blood pressure again. And the blood pressure should go up immediately 2 to 4 points, just a little bit, because you're stepping on the garden hose to squirt blood out, up to the head. But for many people, the blood pressure will go down when you stand up. And that's one of the indicators. Every new patient had that test done. Very first thing when we're doing our initial first exam, we would do that. We do a couple other tests for the adrenals. But POTS is a really good indicator. Let's take a look at your adrenal glands and see how they're handling the stress of life.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And somebody asked a question before in terms of the whole idea about getting dizzy, and that's also related to all of that as well, for sure.
Yes, yes. Gwen says, I keep waking up with a racing heart. I presume that's stress related. My blood pressure is normal.
We just answered that one. Yeah.
Laura says, what is the test for adrenals that you recommend?
Laura, I think we all have our favorite tests, and mine is a company actually out in Washington. It's called Diagnostics, and the reason I like them as much because they give me a gliadin result and they also give me a DHEA result all in one test. I've used them for years. I've used other companies. I think we all have our favorites, and I've never found a company that gives me responses in my patients as quickly as this does, because it seems to be more accurate. So when I see there's really high, or I see it's really low, or it's up and down, then I'm more convinced with this company in particular. And I've tried them all.
Carol asks, are men prone to low cortisol production in response to stress?
They are, but what's interesting about men is we don't see it as often, but I also only see women. But I think that one of the protectors that many men have, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm not a man, is that men are able to compartmentalize a lot better than women can. And what happens then for women is they're multitasking. They think you have to take care of everybody. They're trying to do really well by their parents and their kids and their partner, and they're cooking and they're cleaning. And sometimes men are much able to keep things in compartments and not worry quite as much as we do. Is that always true? Absolutely not. But I think that's a contributing piece to the puzzle, that we see more women overall, but also men are not oftentimes the one that come to seek our services out, because they are sometimes the ones that stay back a little bit until they really don't feel well.
Yeah, yeah. A direct response from that I would give to the question, are men prone to low cortisol? I think humans are prone to low cortisol.
Absolutely.
It's men and women, but
Yep.
men may compartmentalize better, right? So,
Hey, I wish I knew how. Seriously, I'd like to take lessons.
Jill asked the question, what does it mean that AM fasting glucose are high in relation to cortisol? My glucose on waking is considerably higher than later in the morning.
It certainly might be one of the pieces to the puzzle. It's hard to tell because I don't know a lot of your history and I can't really kind of give medical advice, but oftentimes when people wake up, if they've had a stressful sleep pattern, you will notice that cortisol levels can be higher. And I'd be interested in looking at cortisol levels in relation to glucose levels throughout the day to see what's going on, as well as to notice what your pulse rate is, because it could, very much be related. As I explained to you at the beginning, the adrenals very much affect glucose control. So that can absolutely be part of the puzzle.
Barbara says, hello from Michigan. Claudine says, my daughter is 22 years old. She has struggled with feelings of something bothering her in her neck when laying down. Her doctor said it could be her thyroid. Can this be her thyroid, really?
It's hard to know for sure. I mean, it would be helpful to get a full picture. Both Tom and I are functional medicine trained, so I'd be interested in a much bigger picture. What are her food intake like? How much stress does she have in her life? Where in particular is the area? Is it possibly to be ultrasounded? Because sometimes if you have an enlarged thyroid, it can feel like something's kind of heavy in that area as well. So all of those are things that need to be checked out. When you're 22 years old, it's usually not something that's, you should be feeling that. You shouldn't be having that as a symptom. You shouldn't be having it ever, but certainly at 22 would be something that I would get checked out for sure.
Right. Kim says, if we were diagnosed with adrenal fatigue in the past, how long is it necessary to stay on supplements? With diet and lifestyle changes, I feel like I recovered, congratulations, but during times of stress, I start to have symptoms of dizziness again. I take DHEA daily, but I no longer take daily adrenal supplements.
So Kim, here's the thing that's important. And I did the Adrenal Summit because I really wanted people to understand that adrenals are not healed with supplements alone or even diet. If we don't start to understand where the stress is coming from in our lives, is it coming from, let's use me as an example. I grew up with two parents who were Holocaust survivors. My dad he never got mad, but he looked angry all the time. So I became a very good girl. I never caused any problems. I was a straight A student. And later in life, if I saw one that had that same behavior, it triggered that stress response in me. So looking indeed at our story to understand, do I, in that kind of situation, do I not like angry situations? Do I get reactive if my boss talks to me like that? Do I have problems with friends? I'm making things up, of course, Kim, but I want you to understand that many times people come back with adrenal issues over and over again. So the question we have to ask ourselves is why? Do we need to stay on supplements our whole life? Hopefully not. What we do is we heal the adrenals, but it means sleeping. It means finding something that really feeds your soul. It's having fun and joy in your life. It's having sweetness in your life. It's making sure that your diet is clean, that you're not having, a lot of sugar and carbohydrates in your diet. I tend to do keto a lot for people that are on, that have adrenal issues. So it's really taking a deeper look at what might be contributing to me being back here again. It's like, what happened? And it could be the world, it could be the environment. I mean, there's many different factors, of course, but generally, most people can get better. I would say sometimes it takes about a year, and then we can get them off things, but they have to be doing lots of things to heal what got them there to begin with.
I would like to comment on that question, that it was Hans Selye way back in the 50s that associated the word stress with health. Yeah. And how stress affected the adrenal glands. And he pointed out way back then that young men, young healthy men that unfortunately died of trauma, their adrenal glands are the size of a walnut. Right. The same age young men who died of degenerative disease, their adrenal glands are the size of a peanut. Mm-hmm. That the adrenal glands, when whipping the dying horse, and you keep doing that, eventually that organ wears out. It literally wears down. So as you start a change in lifestyle with all of the things that Dr. Marcelle is saying, which are really great, you start feeling better, and you take DHEA or you take some other supplements, and you're feeling better, you're functioning better. How long does it take to rebuild a gland from a peanut to a walnut? And how do you do it? You do it one cell at a time. That's the only way you can do it, is to create the environment to build more new robust cells than what you naturally would be losing, right? So you have to have a net positive rebuilding effect. And all of the lifestyle changes you make are critically important so that you're not whipping that horse that you're trying to get healthy again. Those are critical. But how long does it take to rebuild a gland? One cell at a time. Mm-hmm. A year, as Dr. Pick says, a year, I would say 1 to 2 years. And the only way you know is by having some testing of where you were dysfunctional in your adrenal glands. And then you're feeling great a year from now. Everything's great. Well, let's recheck that. Well, why? I feel great. Because we need to see if you're robustly healthy or just getting by so you don't have symptoms. That's really the only way you know, is to compare the not so good test results with great test results. And in most tests, there's a reference range. I'll make up a number. Let's say from 0 to 40, no, not 0, from 9 to 42 is normal. I'm making that up. Well, if you were at 6 when you came in, and now you're at 21, are you robustly healthy when the range is 9 to 42 and you're at 21? I think we want to be at optimal levels of function because we're at more stress now than ever before in history. So we want our markers to be optimal, not just getting by. And so I would say 1 to 2 years and retest to confirm you're at optimal levels. Then you can taper off that the supplements. You never just stop cold turkey. You taper it down, and then you wait 3 to 6 months and you check again. So if you got up to 38 on a 0 to 42 scale, that's great. Look, you're at the top of the heap here. You're great. And then you've tapered off your supplements. 6 months later, a year later, you go back and Dr. Pick, I feel great, but I'd just like to make sure my adrenals, because I still have a lot of stress in my life. And now you've gone back down to 21 and you were at 38. Now you've got some evidence, boy, those supplements, even though I feel good, I really want to get back up to where I've got robust reserves. That's the way that I would look at it for that one.
I don't disagree with that at all. And I do think also it's important to know that DHEA is a hormone and it can affect the downstream effects of hormones. So I'm not one that's a big fan of not checking to see what else is happening with estrogen and progesterone and testosterone, because it can increase those numbers. So it's important to kind of know that part.
Kat says, so when you spoke about dizziness, would vertigo maybe be related to adrenal issues?
Absolutely can be. Vertigo can be related to adrenals. It can also be related to food sensitivities, and they may go hand in hand. If people have adrenal issues, oftentimes become much more reactive to foods because adrenals can cause digestive dysfunction as well. I mean, they're really intimately connected with the whole physiology of the body. That's why it's so important that we pay attention to what the adrenals are telling us. And indeed, it does take quite a while to get the adrenals to come back into balance.
Claudine says, I suffered by insomnia for 2 years. I'm 52. Once I started working out every morning for 40 minutes, I sleep great. Does cortisol may be balanced by exercise?
Absolutely. Exercise is also a meditation form for people. I'm a barroom dancer. I dance sometimes, 4 times a week for 2 hours. That's my form of meditation. So everybody has their thing that really works well for them. So clearly, if you're working out on a regular basis and you sleep great, it changed something. And that's fantastic.
So you've been doing this for a long time, Dr. Pick, and you recognize, and at IFM, by the way, we both are on faculty at IFM.
Yes, we are. A long time.
Yes, yes. What did you learn in this summit that startled you?
I think what I learned that was so amazing was every speech or every time I had an interview, there was a nugget that I got. And I've been doing this for a very long time. And, reminding me, for example, with Jeff Bland, the fear component. He's absolutely right, because fear does the same thing as worry, and how that really affects the whole cascade for the adrenals. Also, the importance of Dr. Mal did an amazing talk on diabetes. And we have a culture that believes once you're diabetic, especially if you're on high amounts of medication, we can't reverse that. His system is incredibly effective to do that. There were 3 people in particular that talked a lot about trauma. 2 people I've never interviewed before. Eva Detko, she was incredible with regards to looking at what are some tools without having to go into deep therapy. And also Amy Apigian. She was also fabulous with regards to her trauma work, looking at how can we not have that fight, flight, freeze response, and what can we do about it? Annie Hopper did the same thing with regards to kind of that chronic pathways that are really integrated in our brain, of how we continue to have this repetitive pattern of thinking and how to get out of that. So I was really very impressed with some of these talks, and people gave their all in terms of really wanting to help the public know about the information and what they can do themselves. And I think as a culture in medicine, we delegate to the physician their ability to heal you. The reality is it's up to us to contribute to heal ourselves. Really, and I think that's why the summit was so important, is lots of tools are there. And now it's up to each of us, if we have issues with adrenals, to put them into place.
Really good points. Thank you so much. Amal asked, do you know which toxic metals affect adrenals most? For example, the body has an affinity for toxic copper in the brain and in the ovaries and testes. Thank you.
So the thing that we see most often that affect adrenals, mold is a big one. We don't consider that a heavy metal, but it's very, very problematic for the adrenals. But quite honestly, anything that's in excess, if we have a lead toxicity, we have a mercury toxicity, the body's desperately trying to come into balance. And when that happens, the adrenals are the first online that get affected. So mercury, lead, even jet fuel, and some of the other pesticides that we have enormous amounts of. That's why it's so important to oftentimes get tested to find out what you need to kind of look at for yourself, because we're all different in response to things. They did a study in Maine looking at the legislatures, because they wanted to prove in Maine we're so pristine and so healthy here that we didn't have issues. So they did hair and blood samples of 34 of the members from the ages of 18 to 75. There was not one person that didn't not have high levels of all the substances that they tested, at least 14 of them in each person. So to think that we don't have problems, and just as a reminder, the average Newborn has 247 chemicals in its cord blood. And that's, that's when we're trying to be really healthy. And the average breast milk has 150 chemicals in it. Now, all of those things affect adrenal function because the body is trying very hard to come into stability and to really protect itself. And so it's going to be producing cortisol because the body's not really balanced because of that particular issue. So unfortunately, many, many things do it. I don't know that one is worse than the other. They're all pretty bad.
Yeah, I fully agree. That's a really great answer the way you put it. And I've thought about this a lot in the last few weeks, that I think many people, my experience from questions that I hear often is that we're thinking the way we did 10 years ago or 20 years ago in terms of, well, I'm not exposed to anything. As you just said, every person that they checked in Maine had high levels of 14, was it 14 different chemicals or toxins in their body, that the amount of chemicals in our environment, it's 247 pounds per person per day are manufactured or imported into the United States. And those accumulate. And that article in the Journal of Pediatrics came out in 2011.
Right.
So that was 10 years ago. So we know it's much higher now, but all of those chemicals accumulate in the environment. They don't just magically disappear a week after they've been dropped in the air or dropped on the soil. And so our bodies today, human bodies, I've never seen a study on this, comparing the amount of chemicals in fat cells of the average human 15 years ago, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, and today. But I'm sure I would wager a lot that it's dramatically increased now compared to ever before in the history of humanity.
Absolutely.
And we're not recognizing that fact. So it's critically important in getting function back to focus on your adrenal glands because they handle the stress of life, and these chemical exposures are toxins that cause stress to us, critically important for daily function. And we also need to learn about detox. We also need to learn how to protect ourselves, protect our environment for us and our families, stop buying flame retardant soaked clothing, and flame retardant soaked bed sheets and comforters. Oh, but it's such a nice design. It looks so nice. You can't do that. We won't buy anything now that our son is here. We won't buy anything that's either, now if it's for him, a toy or a tool or something like a fork or spoons or little cups to drink out of, they're silicone. There's no plastic. And when people give us gifts that for Geo that are plastic, they don't stay in the house very long. I won't let him, I just don't want that environment for him. And so we have to be more sensitive to protecting ourselves. Of course, repairing ourselves, but also protecting ourselves. And from that, Dr. Pick, any discussions during the event on how to create a less stressful environment for people?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it came up with almost all of the talks. And we also talked pretty extensively, Margaret Christensen, about how, mold and mold exposure, but also how can you have a clean house and what are some of the things that you can use in your home to decrease the body burden. And everybody's, as I mentioned before, a little different in terms of what is going to be their daily routine to decrease the stress. Is it music? Is it certain kinds of lights? Making sure your vitamin D level, getting outside, planting your feet on the ground. Because we are so oriented, especially now we're inside working, is to be able to be outside and put your feet in the soil as much as possible. So there are many different tools that are available in the summit. And for those of you that want to listen, it's finding out what's good for you because it's not the same for everybody. We're all different. And that's really spending time to figure that out for yourself. That's going to be really important.
I would point out that what Dr. Pick just said about planting your feet in the soil was not standing in the soil with rubber coated shoes.
No, it's without shoes.
Without shoes. It's the pretty woman syndrome.
Yes.
You know, you remember the movie Pretty
Oh,
Woman?
totally. Are you kidding?
You know, right. Well, for you and I,
Yeah, right.
you know, but for maybe some of the younger people, you may not have seen it, but he's walking barefoot in the grass, and it completely changes his paradigm about what's important in his life,
Yeah.
right? It's that grounding effect.
Yeah, no question about it. Absolutely.
Shaquila asks, can previous mold exposure affect your adrenals today, even if it was 20 years ago and you're no longer being exposed?
So the problem with mold is for some people, there's still significant buildup. And, you know, for those people, the question I would ask is, are you someone that can smell mold a mile away? If you go into a room, you're immediately reacting to it. That's an indicator that it's still an issue. Are you someone that might go to Home Depot and go, oh my God, the fumes in here are just a bit much? Or somebody has perfume on, even though they might not, they shouldn't probably wear it, but it's this reaction. Those oftentimes are signals for me that there's something going on, and it certainly can be that past exposure to mold, especially if it was significant, may still be an issue in the body. And the way to find that out is there's a book called Mold Kills, and there's a website that he also has that looks at, he has actually a test on there that will give you information about how do you know if mold might be an issue for you. It's actually an eye test that you do. And the website is Mold Kills.
Marvelous. Marvelous. If you were to say there were 3 things that everyone could do that would help support the adrenal glands, what might those 3 things be from your perspective?
Sure. Diet is huge. Sleep is huge. And also having some time to be in parasympathetic. We didn't talk about that tonight. And the body has a system of, you know, kind of the sympathetic, get up and go. You've got, you know, things to do for the day. But we also have the opposite to that, which is the parasympathetic. In our culture today, we don't have much of that. And if you've ever had the time in which the power went out, you couldn't use your computer, you couldn't use your phone, there were no lights in the house, blah, blah, blah. And it was this calming, quiet time. It's kind of like, ooh, this feels kind of nice. That's what you want to be able to do every single day. So it would be diet, it would be sleep, and it would be finding a place to be in the parasympathetic. The breaks that you talked about is like, whoa, how do we slow this down? And then the third thing, or the fourth thing for me would be to have a sense of a spiritual connection, whether that be plants or trees or, you know, and getting outside and being in nature. All of those are very important. And unfortunately, we've gotten away from a lot of that in our culture today. And many people in my practice have said, COVID reminded me to come back to myself. And that's a really good example. That was at the beginning, they're getting a little tired of it now, but at the beginning of really coming back home to themselves, to look and find out what makes them tick. What are the things that they really, you know, like to do? Making food from scratch, you know, not using boxes, not using products, food that actually will get bad if you leave it on the counter overnight. That kind of thing is important.
Kathy says, you mentioned the vagus nerve. What can we do to help our vagus nerve? I've heard from Dr. Tom about using our toothbrush to gag ourselves gently. What are some other ways to stimulate? Well, that's one of the things, right?
That's one of the things you can do to stimulate it. If you are interested in learning a lot more about the vagus nerve, Eva Detko talks a lot about the vagus nerve in her talk, and she's really an expert in it. And also looking at how do you get out of a fight, freeze response, and also doing things like certainly the gag response, but it's also doing thymus tapping. You know, you can do that to really calm the system down, or even learning EFT. It's really something that's very simple, and you can learn to do EFT because all of those are things you can do in the bathroom very quickly to get the body into a kind of a calming state. The other talk that I did on a podcast, actually, I don't think she's in the summit, was with Dr. Hyla Cass, C-A-A-S. And she actually uses CBD and tapping for calming the vagus nerve as well. And she went into a whole discussion with me on my podcast. And it's women to women, hormones, trauma, adrenals, and weight. And that would be another place you could learn a little bit more about it as well in more depth.
And singing
Yep.
in the shower, gargling in the shower. Those are a couple other things that are easy to do and can be very helpful. Quincy asked the question, I notice a terrible plastic-like odor in dollar stores that sticks to my clothing, and I'm very sensitive to smells. I wonder what that could be indicating.
So one of the things that I become very suspicious of when I hear that in someone is with liver detoxification, we have what we call a phase 1 and a phase 2. And phase 1 for some people is very fast. So you might have, for example, take a Tylenol and it becomes what we call metabolically mobilized. So it becomes more active. And then we have a phase 2 to get it out of the system. And we hear about glutathione and N-acetylcysteine that helps with detoxification. My concern when I hear that about people with that smell, number one, that they have toxicity that isn't getting out of the system, but two, that their detox pathways may not be working properly. So I would be curious to find out if that is you, and working with a functional medicine practitioner would really be helpful to look at what we call a detoxification profile to see if that's a piece to the equation, because that also can cause adrenal dysfunction as well and contribute to the adrenals being overworked.
Really good answer. The detoxification profile would look at your genetics to see what are you sensitive to not detoxing very well. Really easy to tell. And then what are you accumulating? What chemicals might be inside your fat cells, where a lot of these chemicals, to get them out of the bloodstream, they get deposited in the storage tanks. And your fat cells are storage tanks and they hold all of this. So for those that are wanting to lose weight, are starting a weight loss program, you're going to burn off fat with exercise. You have to be careful, because when you burn off those fat, what happens is you're releasing these chemicals that may be stored in the fat. So you have to make sure that your detox pathways are working well in order to metabolize and get rid of this stuff that got thrown in the storage tanks in your body.
Absolutely. I'm not a big fan of fasting for that reason. Doing a water fast, for example, especially if we don't know what's in the fat stores, because that can mobilize and actually make you sicker.
Right. The whole concept of fasting and fasting mimicking diets and intermittent fasting, there's a lot of benefits to those. There good science that says, yeah, there's benefits, but you have to make sure that you're detoxing well first.
Yeah.
So that as you release these toxic chemicals, there's, a classic example is the perimenopausal woman, that as she's going through menopause and her ovaries are not making as much estrogen anymore, it's the job of the adrenal glands to take over. And the adrenal glands make about 1/10 the estrogen that the ovaries make, just enough for your bones to stay healthy, your blood vessels to function properly. But when your adrenals are in a state of depletion and they don't make that 1/10 of the estrogen, and post-menopausal women now are estrogen low, estrogen deficient, you start losing bone. And what's in the bone? Well, that's where a lot of heavy metals get stored, especially lead. So the lead levels in your bloodstream go up, and the lead in your blood can accumulate in your brain. And now cognitive function for post-menopausal women is much higher than cognitive dysfunction in peri or pre-menopausal women. And this is a reason why, is because all this toxic stuff that starts getting released is not being detoxed and gotten rid of very well.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, we see it all the time.
Gwen comments, fasting for women is different than men due to fat stores. Thank you. Okay. And I don't know if there's a question there. And Catherine asked, are phantom smells, chemicals, smoke, smell associated with adrenals or detox pathways?
I'm probably more associated with detox pathways, but it's hard to know. I need to know a little bit more about that. But if I hear somebody having those kinds of reactions, the first thing I'm thinking about again is the whole detoxification pathways. And it would be helpful to get that evaluated more to find out what in particular is the toxic burden.
Cheryl says adrenals crash from low DHEA. Doesn't DHEA cause hair loss? I already have hair loss from high glucose levels. I'm pre-diabetic. Is there a test to see how DHEA affects the body?
So it's a little bit more of a complicated question, Cheryl, because DHEA in and of itself doesn't crash the adrenals. When the DHEA, if the adrenals are working overtime, DHEA actually goes up first. And after a long time, it comes back down. But when you are putting someone on DHEA, for some people, DHEA does increase testosterone. And when testosterone levels are elevated, that's when you might notice hair loss. So when I'm looking at someone, I'm looking at the whole picture. I'm going to be looking at hormone levels. I'm going to be looking at DHEA levels. I'm going to be looking at cortisol levels. So I can put the whole piece of the puzzle together. And of course, glucose levels. But remember, we talked at the very, very beginning that glucose levels are very related to stress as well. So I'd be very curious to find out what the adrenal levels look like throughout the day, and hormone levels, and what's happening with testosterone, but also something called sex hormone binding globulin too, because that's one of the things that actually might be elevated. So it's not allowing the body to utilize the hormones in the way that they should be utilized.
Last question. Michelle asks, what is the connection between adrenals and Graves' disease?
So adrenal glands, as I mentioned before, can cause very significant dysregulation of the thyroid. Is there a direct relationship between adrenals and Graves'? Yes, and the reason is that Graves' disease is also an autoimmune response. And when I mentioned before that you can have your own, individual autoimmune reaction, it certainly can be a contributor to Graves' disease, which is too much production of the thyroid. It's hyperproduction.
So the hour's up, but if you have pulled, say, wow, I didn't know that, and just a point or two in this last hour, imagine what it'll be like to have the cliff notes of 58 interviews. So in 5 minutes, you can get the bullet points of every one of these experts. I think it's a great idea what you've done, Dr. Pick, just a great idea to make the event more applicable or user-friendly. I guess I'd say it that way, user-friendly. So we posted the link here. The event started yesterday. I think I'm on there today. I think you said that I'm on today's event. And so please register for this event. Take a look, see what you think. You may watch 3 interviews. You may watch 58, at least the cliff notes, and then watch a few of the full interviews. Dr. Pick, thank you so very much for doing all this work and for sharing your knowledge with us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted.
Real pleasure. All right, everyone. We'll see you next week. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.